Chris, you're someone who is extremely lovable, and anyone who knows you knows that. So I'm just stating the obvious, but it's so cool to have you back on the show. And we will put in the show notes the link to other episodes when you've been here. But I'm excited to see you anytime. But you wrote a new book, which I don't know how you keep finding more, but you find really valuable things to share.
Thank
And
you.
your new book is called Time Anxiety, The Illusion of Urgency and a Better Way to Live. And I was just speaking with a woman who's in our audience about this exact thing.
Mm,
And it's very real. I don't know that it's something we all talk enough about, but I think it's
mhm.
something people spend a lot of time having anxiety about. So let's just talk about why you came to this. Like, obviously, this is something that you must have overcome inside yourself to be able to know enough to share. So tell me where this comes from for you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me back. It's such an honor. I'm a big fan, as you know. And I did not come to this topic out of like an academic interest. I kind of came to it from a very personal experience of just constantly feeling overwhelmed and I was going to say stressed, but it's more like distressed of like not knowing if I was doing the right thing. Like there's so many things that we could be doing at any moment, and there's probably more than one right thing, right? But still, like this constant sense of like there's something I should be doing and I can't tell what it is, and I'm not sure how to make those decisions. And how do I connect, what I'm doing in the short term with some sort of like greater mission or purpose or long term? And so I just felt very disturbed for a long time. And I felt like, people approach this from different angles and such, from practical and spiritual and philosophical. But I felt like no one was really looking at the core issue of time anxiety. And whenever I used that phrase, whenever I mentioned it to people, so first of all, it was me, it was my own like personal experience. But then second, as I talked with other people about it and they would say, oh, what are you working on? I'm like, oh, I'm kind of exploring this concept of time anxiety. And they would always have a really strong reaction to it. And they would say, I've never heard of that, but I have that, or like, this is the thing that governs my life in some way. This is the greatest problem of my life, if I really think about it. Or some people would say, like, my friends and I talk about this all the time, but we never had a name for it. And so I was like, well, this is interesting. So it's not just me, right? And then started doing more studies and more research. And I was like, okay, I actually want to go in this direction and spend like a couple of years like truly understanding it. So when you said overcome, I don't think I've overcome, but I think I have internalized and learned a great deal. And I think I am much better now than I was, probably a couple of years ago at the outset of this. So I do think this is a common struggle that a lot of people have in a lot of ways. And I also think there are some things we can do to make it better.
First of all, I just think sometimes like naming the thing out loud
Mhm.
is very soothing because
Sure.
you're listening and you're somebody who identifies with this, your whole
Mhm.
nervous system feels a little bit calmer just for having the awareness, right? So that's
Mhm.
number one. I also think this particular audience might very much agree with some of the thoughts that you just laid out because you are a person of tremendous intention
Mhm.
and you seek to really be in purpose all the time. And the people that I've met in this audience really have that as a value. They really want to live a purpose driven life. And for those of you listening who don't know, Chris has traveled the entire world. Like,
Mhm.
that is one incredible thing that you set out to accomplish, was to go to all these countries. And that's not a small thing. And you've put together incredible summits and you have written books and wanted so much to ask big questions that you could try to solve and to create groups of collaborative partners that could solve. So, I mean, I can only imagine that when you wake up wanting to make such a difference in the world,
Mhm.
it really doesn't feel like there's enough time in the day. And that's a very frustrating feeling, to have a soul that wants to do and give so much. And
Mhm.
not 12 of you, there's only one of you. So
Mhm.
I do think you're speaking to your audience, because I think a lot of people listening I don't know that everybody is that way, but I know a lot of people who listen to the show are that way, that they're
Sure.
built to want to do as much good as they can. And that
Mm-hmm.
probably does feel very frustrating when they
Mm.
would do more, but there's not more time in the day. So
Yeah.
what's the first step to beginning to feel some ease around this? And then
Mm-hmm.
how can we begin to create some kind of paradigm shift so we don't
Mm-hmm.
constantly feel the pressure of how much time we don't have?
Mm-hmm. On the point of like waking up and wanting to do good and such, I think that's very noble, and I hope that I have good intentions, as you said. But I think I often want to just feel better, and I often want to, like, I think it's also okay to like wake up and be like, what good can I do for myself, and ultimately, by doing good for yourself, you're going to be able to do good for others as well. So it's not only like a desire of like service, to others. It's also like a complete purpose, driven life, which involves like having fun and like expressing joy and like caring for different people and caring for yourself and your future self. But as for like, so what's the first step? I think the first step is learning to notice and learning to pay attention. If you are stressed out about like where does the time go, there's not enough time, then maybe the first thing is to notice like, okay, how do I spend my time? And to pay attention to like, how do I make choices throughout the day? If somebody asks for something, or a lot of us do have a certain amount of autonomy over our time, even if we have like a packed schedule. If you're doing any kind of knowledge work for your job, there's usually like some degree of freedom over how you spend it and which tasks you do in which order and how you sequence things. So if you just start kind of noticing, I think noticing is better than not noticing. And it's very easy to kind of go through the day without actually paying attention. And so if you start with that, and maybe also ask yourself, like, what do I want more of and what do I want less of? Like more of this, less of that. Then I think even without like making a big strategic plan to like do a whole bunch of stuff, I think even just by noticing, you are naturally going to make some different changes in your life. And so I think noticing is the first step, and then there's more that we can build on, depending on your situation and such. But learning to pay attention is not a hard skill, but it's something that a lot of people are unfamiliar with, I think.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad that you said what you said because I do see you as somebody who can be extremely selfless and super generous. And I love knowing that you also can prioritize your own well-being. And
Sure.
I do think our greatest gift to the world is being in wholeness, right? Like really
Mhm.
like being filled up and at ease.
Mhm.
And I do know that that is something that you have been, really prioritizing. And I like hearing you say that because I think when people hear someone who's very good natured say that, it gives them permission to do that more for
Mhm.
themselves. So I actually think that
Yeah.
was really important.
Thank you.
I also
Glad
think
you
it's
said that.
really an interesting paradox because people will talk about how they have no time.
Mm.
And then we have this really interesting thing called data. And
Mhm.
you know
Sure.
that everyone's on their phone
Mhm.
for so many hours in their
Right.
week that it's
Right.
nauseating.
Mhm.
And I don't know that that misses anyone.
Mhm.
So what does it mean that people say they have no time and then they check their phone log and they spent 4.5 hours a day scrolling the internet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably applies to like most of us, right? Like speaking for myself too. Um, and there are certainly, ways to like optimize and to get better about things like that. I think for me, I just have to be careful because I was really into like productivity culture and really good at optimizing. And, like I read all the books and like followed all the things. And I kind of, I kind of learned over time that I'm actually getting better at doing the wrong things. Like I'm getting really effective, or really efficient, I guess I should say, at just trying to do more. And so yes, I mean, if I'm using my phone too much, I should probably cut that out. I should probably build better habits and such. But I think the problem with a lot of this culture, that mindset advice is like, it it seemingly promises that if you just get a handle on these things, then you'll be able to do everything. You'll be able to do like all the things that are on your list. And I think we know that like the list just expands, right? Like if we have more time, then there's always more that we can do. And so I kind of had to like back up a little bit and say, okay, well, rather than just learn this cool email trick, to help me like process more messages or something, maybe actually need to learn to be more intentional about my time and what I'm working towards and all these big picture things. And so it probably includes, as I said, being mindful of devices and screen time and social media and all that. But I just think the track that a lot of people tend to go down just kind of leads them back to feeling more stressed out than they, or at least as stressed out as they were before.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, which I think is a reason for people to get stressed, and you talk a lot about this a little bit in your book, but what I hear is people saying to me, "How the heck did you start a podcast when you had 3 children under the age of 4?"
Hmm.
And say, "Oh, because I don't do things perfectly, like as
Hmm.
a,"
Hmm. Very
and
good.
realize that very often the reason people think they don't have enough time is
Hmm.
actually about perfectionism.
Hmm.
And there is so much that I'm not doing, which is why I have the time to get it done.
Hmm. That's great.
Right?
Hmm.
So there's a funny line in Seinfeld where Elaine's boss, Peterman, he's like, "Congratulations on a job done." Like he
Hmm.
doesn't say well
Right,
done.
a job done. That's great.
You got it done. And
Hmm.
like my husband's always saying to me, and it's done, right? Like,
That's great.
but like, what do you have to say to people
Hmm.
who are constantly holding themselves to such a high standard that things that should take X amount of time
Hmm.
take 20 times more than that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great example, and I would tell them to do exactly just that, like learn to do things poorly. And you don't want to do everything poorly, right? You want to have excellence in some areas, but I think a lot of us grow up with this culture of excellence. Especially for anybody listening or watching who is like a straight A student. Obviously that's great, and they're smart, and that aptitude takes them lots of places, but it also kind of comes with this filter that everything you do must be done that way, and that's really not going to work very well. It's not going to work as you want to do different things. And if you are trying to, as you say, start the podcast with the kids and all the other things that you do, you are going to have to be willing to accept, oh, well, this, maybe my 80% is as good as other people's, 100%, or at least their 90%, or whatever it is. Or maybe there's actually just, it's not even about comparison. It's more just like there's power in being able to get things done and move on and accept that not everything is going to be perfect. Otherwise, you're never going to actually write a book or whatever it is you hope to do, because there's always going to be more to be done.
Speaking of which, this is a little bit of a segue into something else that you have been doing, which is Side Hustle School.
Mm,
And this is something that people say to me all the time, which is, how on earth can I start a side hustle because I don't have time?
mm,
And I'm like, because of what we just talked about, for
mhm,
me, it's like, well, if I can spend an hour instead of being on my phone, just like doing something and getting the messy version out in the world,
mhm,
and I do that a few hours a week, you
mhm.
multiply that by like a few months, like I will
Right.
have a side hustle. But I
Mhm,
would love to hear your take on it because after doing 2,000 episodes or more, um, I'm sure you've come across story after story where people seemingly didn't have
mhm.
time and then somehow found time to make something that actually became quite significant. So
Yeah, well, it's
how
additive.
can you frame that? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's additive, as you say. Like, as you began putting the time into it, then you probably also learned to be faster at it as you went along and you were better at it. And then it also had more and more impact. And so then you're actually more motivated to invest more time and resource into it. And so I think the additive process is really helpful, and starting with a pretty, I don't want to say small, but a very like measurable, identifiable goal. Like with the podcast, like I've been doing the daily podcast, for I think 2,700 plus days, 2,800 plus days. But you don't have to start with like a daily podcast. It could be once a month, even if you can't do once a week, right? Like whatever your goal is. And, just getting to that can be its own reward, right? And so, yeah, I think I often hear from people who are like, "Oh, I didn't have time, but I was thinking of it in I was imagining I needed to have like this whole product suite, or I needed to have like coaching and consulting and these courses for sale and the blog and the TikTok and everything." And really, if you can just have like one of those things and be consistent with it, that's probably going to be better than trying to do everything, I think.
I feel like stories do such a good job of like landing and we
Mm.
remember them. Like
Hmm.
I literally remember every story you've told me. I actually repeat those stories. I repeat the story
That's
about
funny.
Teresa Greenway and the sourdough bread.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, there's 2,700 of these in your head, but
Mm.
can you think of a story of somebody who didn't have a lot of time because
Mm.
of whatever their circumstances were and made something beautiful?
Well, that's a great example right there. So Teresa Greenway was a woman who I forget her age, but she was older than what some people might think of as like an online course creator. I believe she was in her 50s or even 60s, and she was really into baking, and that was her skill. And she had taught some like local workshops and such, and then she decided to film a course on baking sourdough bread, and she put this up on a platform called Udemy and ended up doing very, very well with that. Then she made like the follow up, and she made a whole series of courses all about sourdough, like not even just other kinds of bread, like sourdough bread, going really deep in the niche. And she had actually been homeless for a time. She was caring for a child that had some kind of neurodivergence and special needs. She had been working as like a housekeeper in a motel part time. She'd been on food stamps and all this. Basically, the course that she made, enabled her to kind of reinvent her life. She made like $86,000 one year selling these courses on sourdough bread, and then much more after that. And so I love that example of her because it was super low tech. I mean, she had like a camera that costs less than $100, and the lighting was really bad. And like later on, she got better at those things, but that was after she had the proof of concept. So there's a whole like archive of stories of people who've done things like I really like reinvention stories. I'm kind of a sucker for those kinds of stories.
I love reinvention, and I was just talking to my friend yesterday, and that was the word she used. And I
Mm.
think, especially for people, I'm 45, like I feel like in our 40s, it's such a gift to give ourselves to just
Mhm.
like explore what reinvention gets to look like, because I think it's such a weird culture to say to someone at 18, choose who you want to be and stick to it for the next 60
Sure.
years. It's like
Yeah.
nothing in nature is like that. Like, why would
Right.
we not consider all the
Hmm.
possibilities of who we get to be? It's like Jim Carrey is now a painter,
Right.
it's like so cool. Like
Yeah.
he's doing such different things.
Hmm.
Um, when you were looking into the psychology of time anxiety, was there anything that surprised you about it?
Well, we were just talking about reinvention. One common fear, or one thing that people express a lot, is it feels like it's too late. Like I feel like I am too late. I am too late for this dream that I had when I was younger, or maybe I didn't have the dream when I was younger, but now I realize like I've been living my life the quote unquote wrong way, and I wish I could do something, but I think it's too late. And the interesting thing is that people express this at all ages. So it's not only people like in their whatever decade, 40s, 50s, 30s. There are like teenagers, who are like going off to school, and they're like, it's too late to get into the school I want to go to, or I really wanted to be like the Olympic gymnast, and you have to start that when you're 9, or but the similar language. And so for those of us who are in our 40s, I'm the same age as you, it's easy to be like, oh, that person has their whole life in front of them. It's so silly of them to think that they're too late. But people our age will use very similar, language. And so this is obviously like an overriding kind of concern or fear of humankind, or at least of a lot of people. And obviously, it's not too late. Like life does have some constraints, for certain things and such, but there's often more than one way, to pursue a dream or a goal or an idea. And you often have more than one dream or goal or idea, and people are reinventing and changing, at all times. So I think that's, being open to change, being willing to take small steps, learning to like overcome the cognitive distortions that affect how we think about time and how we kind of spend our days, that can be very helpful.
What do you think is the difference between time anxiety and just the fear of missing out?
Time anxiety exists across like all three dimensions of time. So the fear of missing out is more about like something is happening like right now that I'm not a part of. And so time anxiety also includes like looking back, like I missed out on something,
And
or also the future, like there's like I want to be in a different place, X years from now, but I don't know what to do in order to get there. So it's like a through line that kind of goes, throughout all dimensions of time, as I mentioned. And so it can be very overwhelming, and we get stuck in it, and we kind of feel paralyzed. And just a really quick thing you can do if you're feeling like distressed in this way is to start practicing this act of giving yourself more time. And so you can give yourself more time by like going through your calendar and like, what can you take off? It's kind of like decluttering, but with time. So it's even better than just like cleaning out your sock drawer or your closet. I mean, that's helpful, but time is the most precious resource, right? So like if we can look at the calendar and be like, okay, is there like a standing meeting that I don't actually really need to go to, or is there something I've committed to that wouldn't be that hard for me to like opt out of? If I can pick a couple of things, from the next few weeks and like just take those off my calendar and then notice how that feels, most likely it's going to feel very relieving because you're like, oh, I've got that time back, and what can I then do with that time, right? And like, don't rush to fill it right away, just kind of like sit with it and be like, I have given myself the gift of these hours or this afternoon or whatever, and I've been really distressed about not having enough time. So now what do I do?
so it's so timely that we're talking about it, pun totally intended, because
Mm,
yesterday, by way of a referral, my friend on Friday said to me, you should buy the book, Buying Back Your Time.
mm,
And so I bought this book over the weekend and I was reading it on Sunday. And it's a book by Dan Martell. I don't know him. I thought the book was great. Anyways, but what I found was that Sunday night, I told my team, we're not having any more team meetings
mm,
because we were spending approximately 24 hours a month
mhm,
having team meetings. And I realized that having nothing to do with my team, because my team is quite amazing, I
mm.
realized for myself that anytime there was time, I filled it with things that I needed to do.
Right.
And I realized this doesn't even have much to do with the book either, but it was all kind of helpful. Is that for me personally, I was addicted to not having time.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
it was like a version of like self-neglect was to
Mm,
just never have time. And
mm,
so it was almost like my
interesting.
nervous system wasn't comfortable having time. So I would just fill it. So I was always in use and always busy and always doing something.
Hmm,
And I find it's really interesting that we can say what it is that we want, but if our
mm-hmm,
nervous system doesn't have the capacity to expand, to have
mm-hmm,
more ease,
mm.
we'll just sabotage the ease and fill
Right,
it with being busy. And there's something
right,
about being busy that there must be a gain in that, right?
right. And
So,
that's really interesting because you are very intentional and very purposeful and like a leader, in this space. So I imagine how deeply entrenched it is, in other people who haven't done as much work or haven't thought about it a lot.
and it's,
I
yeah, I
wonder if
mean,
there's some sense of shame or something. Like, do you feel like you you've connected it somehow to productivity? Like, if the schedule is fuller, um, then somehow I am, giving more to the world, or I don't know, maximizing my potential or something else. I don't know.
I think for me, it's, you know a little bit about my story, but
Hmm.
having the situation I had growing up with my family, it felt really selfish for me to have needs because I had to take care of them as a
Yeah.
little kid. And I think also sitting still means I have to feel my feelings.
Okay, I get
And
that.
I would rather be in my like parentified child mode and like take care of
Hmm.
everybody else
Yeah.
than have to just like sit still. And
Hmm.
stillness is, it's interesting. I went with my mindfulness teacher. We went to a battered women's shelter and there were all these
Mm.
kids, they couldn't sit still and they were
Yeah.
rocking, moving and whatever. And she said, really lovingly, like, can I put my hand on your shoulder?
Mm.
If she asked permission. And then this girl started crying because she got still. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's like more of that work needs to be
Hmm.
done as much as I've thought I
Hmm.
took like literally sabbaticals to go feel my
Right.
feelings. There's just more to be done. And
Mm.
one other thing I thought was so juicy, which maybe you want to speak to, is that for what it's worth, in this book, Buying Back Your Time, Dan Martell was saying, like, for instance, someone like Oprah, he was making this up, but he said an ideal day for her would be to only have 2 hours of a meeting that she really has to be on that's going to move the needle on what
Hmm.
she's doing. And the rest of her day should be like meditation, reading good books, filling herself up, taking long walks. And he went through the entire day, like,
Hmm.
wake up, eat
Right.
breakfast, meditate, this. And it was like, and then he was like, don't you see how that would make her the best version of who she's supposed to be? And blah, 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 blah,
Hmm.
blah.
Interesting.
And it's like, of course, that's what she should be doing. And then
Uh-huh.
everything else, someone else should check the emails and someone else should do this and someone else should. So I find it like fascinating that
Mm.
we squeeze so much into our day when
Hmm.
in reality, there's probably like our queen bee role that we need to
Right.
play. And
Right.
then the rest of the time, like really doing the deep work to be the most
Hmm.
centered, still, compassionate, awake, alive, flow state version of ourselves.
Mm.
It's probably like, it's just a totally different way of looking at time. I'm
Hmm.
just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I used to like fly around the world to not, feel my feelings. So I understand. I mean, I used to fill my schedule in a different way. It was like, oh, let me just go off and do this thing because this thing needs to be done, right? And I think like there's always something that we can fill our time with. Like that's never going to not be an option, even if you eliminate like, oh, I'm not going to do as much social media or I'm not going to watch TV or whatever. Well, then there's like all these other things that we can fill our time with. And something that I've really like come to like internalize for myself is not all time is equal, not all hours are equal. Like if we want to like write a book or something, we can't say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to write the book from like 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Like all day long, I'm going to write the book, and I'm going to do that again the next day and the next day, and after a certain number of weeks or something, I'm going to have a book. It doesn't work that way because we have this
Oh,
limited amount of creative focus,
yeah.
and it replenishes, but not the same day. Like it replenishes like a day later, right? So, um, I mean, I always understood that a little bit, but I didn't. Or I knew it, but I didn't really understand it. I think that's the best way to put it. And so, kind of understood eventually that most of us have like 2 to 3 hours a day, of actually like good creative energy that we can devote to projects or to something that requires that kind of focus. And once I really thought about that, I was like, oh, so that means these hours are actually probably the most important. And we need to find a way to protect that time, and prioritize that time above all else and not try to like fit in a whole bunch of other things. Like we can do other things during some of the other hours, but these hours are actually like precious and vital. And so I started structuring my whole life around that because otherwise I'm not going to actually write the books or do whatever I say is important. But I say it's important, but am I actually doing it? Like, are we judged by what we say is important, or like is the actual importance, based on like how we actually live?
When you say these hours, is that something that is a particular time of day, like 4 a.m., or is it meaning when it hits you, those are the hours you're going to prioritize?
So it's different for each person. For most people, those tend to be in the morning,
Yeah.
but it is different. Some people can be like later or like in the afternoon, typically. Dan Pink has written a good bit about this in his book When, and it's very helpful. So yeah, it's basically like we get 2 to 3 hours, of creative, focus, and we can choose how we want to spend those, but we can't just magically create more, at least not without a cost. Like you can push through and try to do more, but that work is probably not going to be as effective or as good. And then we're going to be more tired, like the fatigue will be higher. afterwards compared to if we just use those 2 to 3.
It's so true. It really is a valuable thing just to be aware of, that like you just don't have an endless amount of the same peak creativity.
Mhm,
Um, and it's a gift when it comes. And yeah, that's, I think, something we should just give ourselves more grace around, like just with that
mhm,
awareness is really helpful. You said something earlier that I just wanted to comment on, because I do hear a lot of people say this, which is the feeling of having missed out because of
mhm,
the past. And then it becomes this like perpetual
mhm,
feeling of shame. And then whatever moment they're in, well, they've spent so much time now thinking about what they didn't accomplish in their life.
mhm,
And then another, like, for instance, like, my mom is someone who, one of the things that she feels, and she's a very open person. So
mhm.
I kind of have the license to, because she's this way, she'll share
Sure.
whatever. But she, felt like the best years of her life were in her marriage, and then her marriage
Mm,
ended. And she felt like, therefore, it was a failure, right?
mm,
My dad left and cheated and whatever. And then she had all this talent that she had never really put to use. So even when my dad left and she was only 44 or something, she felt
mhm,
so like such a washed up, like, what am I
mm,
supposed to do? But now 30 years have gone by
mhm.
and she's in that same loop, but there were 30 years
Right, right.
to do with.
Mhm,
And I say to her, because my grandmother, her mother, she's passed now, but she lived till 96.
mhm.
She lived like, I mean, I took her to Israel for the first time she'd ever been when she was 89. So like
Wow.
had the energy, right?
Yeah.
So I say, I'm like, Mom, there's like another, and like because she's so in a
Mhm.
shame spiral of what she didn't do,
Right.
she's devastated. And so
Mm,
when you talk to someone who
mhm.
feels that way, it feels so real to them.
Yeah.
What's a good turnaround?
Yeah. Well, I think specifically for your mom, there's a book by Henry Oliver called Late Bloomers. He's really kind of studied this and looked at all these people that have had these just really interesting second or third acts, beginning at a later age, and actually showing that some of their earlier mistakes, quote unquote, or even perceived failures are actually kind of what led to them, having the second or third act that was so successful or otherwise so valuable. But if it's somebody at maybe an earlier age, I think they're probably experiencing this type of cognitive distortion where they have black and white thinking, or they're catastrophizing, or somehow, as you said, they're kind of stuck in this. And so maybe one thing is like, what is an alternative narrative? Like, what's another story? What's another story that we can tell about this experience so far? Or if you're so stuck in it that it's hard for you to like reinterpret that, what's another story, that we can use like looking forward? What can we do today and tomorrow? And I like to encourage people to think about an extra day of the week. Like imagine you have an eighth day of the week. I think this is better than asking people about like their ideal day or their single perfect day, because that's like a one-off, and so it creates all this pressure like what's my perfect day of my life. But if you have an extra day every week, then you have like 52 of them a year. So it can also be additive in the sense that like there's so much you could learn. You can learn a language in a year if you did that. If you studied, consistently, you could write the book, or release your album, or learn to paint, or do something totally different. And then once you've really thought about that, because I think a lot of us have not spent a lot of time thinking about what we really want, what we want to get out of life. And also, when I ask people about the eighth day of the week, the first thing they always say is, "I would catch up." Like I would use that time to like catch up on my email. And so you have to take that out and be like, okay, imagine you were actually already caught up, right? Then how would you spend it, right? Um, so just like we talked about in the beginning about paying attention and noticing, I think if you ask yourself, what are those activities that I would put on my eighth day? You can then go away and make a plan and like structure everything. But I honestly think just by like identifying them and noticing, oh, this is something that would be important to me. If there was a day in which nobody else was asking things of me, and I didn't feel as stressed out about communication or about things I feel like I'm behind on, this is what I would do. I think you'll probably find yourself, maybe doing some of those things more going forward. And I think that's good. That'll make you feel better.
Another question, this idea of, the fact that you've done 2,800 podcasts, which is like, I really can't wrap my mind around it. I think there are some people who have the other kind of anxiety where the idea of committing to something that
Mm,
requires time is, it's a non-starter, right? It's like,
sure.
how do you, knowing that that's a commitment that, I mean, you chose to make it, no one's holding you to it, but you're
Right.
choosing it. But how do you not feel overwhelmed by that commitment and say to yourself, like, yeah, I'm gonna do this every single day without feeling
Mhm.
the pressure of your time and like, oh my God, this is just gonna go on and on.
Well,
How am I gonna
yeah.
do?
I am somewhat compulsive, like I do kind of gravitate towards things like this. But I would say, well, I guess I would also say that it's actually easier to do it every day than it would be to do it several times a week. Like 7 times a week with the podcast is easier than 3 times a week, I think, because it has to get done. It's not like, oh, today it's like every day. That helps. And also, I didn't commit to doing 2,800 in a row, like from day one. I committed to a year. It was like, I'm going to do this every day for a year. And then it kind of grew from there. The same with going to every country in the world. It wasn't like I've been to 2 countries. Like I went to Canada and then I was like, let me go to all the others. It was like I loved traveling and I worked in West Africa for a few years as an aid worker and I've been to Asia and a few and like I was like, oh, I've been to like 50 countries. That seems like a lot. How many countries are there? Oh, there's 193. Okay, what is that? Maybe I'll try to get to 100. And then as I get closer to that, I'm like, that's not that hard actually, because it's only half of them. So the real goal is like but it comes through experience. And so if you take this and apply this to whatever it is you're thinking of that seems intimidating, you're like, okay, well, what's something that would be a success on its own? And as you like get closer to that thing, then you have this experience and that gives you more confidence. And then the goal tends to grow. But so I didn't start out with the 2,800 plus, consecutive podcasts or the every country thing. It started out with something else.
It's just so extraordinary every time I hear you talk about that. And it's just such a fascinating, cool life that you lead. It's like they should make a movie about you just living your life
Probably
because
not. It'd be like a very short movie, but thank you for saying that.
I don't think so. That's not possible. I'm
Like
just
6 hour
curious,
length.
what's what's one of the countries that is so it's surprising to people, like meaning it was
Mm.
either really actually exotic or it was the kind of thing where it was totally different than what you expected.
Oh, I have a few favorite countries that I would like to go back to. They tend to be like smaller places that I didn't have a lot of expectations, but I went and I was like, oh, this is really great. I'm here for like a week and I would like to be here for several weeks. So Lithuania was like that for me. Maybe some other parts of like the Baltics or also the Balkans, a little bit south. So like Montenegro and Macedonia, I really liked. So these like small little places were just kind of fun and different. And it's like, oh, not a lot of people go there, at least compared to the, bigger, more Western European countries. So those were fun, among
Oh,
others.
that's really cool. My half my family is Lithuanian.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's great.
I've, I've never been there.
Oh, you should go.
No concept of what it is. And it's so funny that you said Montenegro because there's this world school program called
Mm,
Boundless.
mhm,
And we were just looking at the 6 or so locations they have, and one is
mm.
Portugal, one is Montenegro. And I was like,
Great.
how do we go there? It's so pretty. And
Yeah.
no one ever talks about it,
Yeah,
but
that's great.
explain how beautiful it was. It's so cool that you've done that. And I said to you before we were started recording how it's such a unique thing that you've been around the world because you have so much love and like real perspective. Like who the heck knows anything about anything? I mean, not that you know everything having been
I'm,
there for a week, but you know so much more about the oneness of the world.
mm,
And one thing I found, because I lived for a year in Spain and I lived for 3 years in
yep.
Jerusalem, which is only 2 different countries, but I found out how people are so much more alike than they are
Mm,
different. And I
sure.
was like, oh my God, I wish people would just go around the world and find
Right.
out like everybody wants to know what good shows on TV. And,
Mm,
it's like we're all wired very
mm,
similarly in some ways. And so I love that you're such a beautiful world citizen. You're such a
mm.
good person.
Well, thank you, Kathy. You are an ambassador as well. an ambassador of joy and light and goodwill.
Thank you. It means a lot coming from you because I
It's
feel
true.
like you really you have a good sense of goodness. And so anyway, tell everybody where and when. I feel like it's like in a month, but tell them where they can get the book, if there's any bonuses, where should they go to buy?
Great. Well, you can go to timeanxiety.com, which will hopefully be up by the time people listen or watch this. You can buy the book at any retailer, online, offline, any local bookstore. Um, I mean, that's pretty it. I'm going to do a book tour throughout the US and Canada, so hopefully I'll get to hang out with some folks. That should all be on timeanxiety.com. And I write a weekly newsletter on mental health at yearofmentalhealth.com.
So great. Well, we'll put all of that in the show notes as well. And
Amazing.
if you haven't read his other books, we'll put those in there as well. But it is so great to help authors and go pre-order their books. And Chris is such a good person to go support. So I
Thank you,
highly recommend.
Kathy.